We're breathing in and we're letting go. And for those of us just joining in, we were just listening to Heavy by Linkin Park and Kiera. And this is just honoring the 2-year anniversary that's coming up of Chester Bennington when he committed suicide. And so we really want to hold space for that, as he was a beautiful soul and created beautiful art. And this was a beautiful song that he left us with. And so let's go ahead and take a deep breath. And so we're going to be talking about duality is an illusion, we seek transcendence. And so we're going to be going into a lot of the illusions of right and wrong, good and bad. It's going to be a big topic ahead of us to cover. I'm going to be bringing in some Taoist philosophy that's going to help drive these points home. But I'm going to actually start by reading the intro story to my book. And so for those of you who have Living Peace, we can go ahead and turn to page, 119, 118. And for those of you at home have it as well, feel free. So let's take a deep breath. Flashback. I really enjoy working with teenagers who are eager to learn, and most of them are incredible knowledge sponges when given the opportunity to soak up new ideas. One such experience I had was with a very special, intelligent girl who was only 14 years old when we met. A colleague of mine recommended me as a teen coach for this girl. Her mother had tried everything she knew to do with no results, and like the man from the previous chapter, I was her last resort before she planned to admit her daughter to a mental hospital. 4 months prior to our meeting, this young lady began burning her body using salt and ice. She didn't know why she inflicted these wounds on herself. Her parents certainly had no clue, and all the therapists they took her to weren't finding any answers. 3 months of therapy had resolved nothing. Meanwhile, the girl continued to sink deeper into depression, feeling more and more isolated and judged, with perpetuated self-mutilation. When she arrived and sat down in my office for the first time, all I saw was beauty. I shared my approach to healing with her and her mother, and they both felt comfortable and at ease with my philosophy. Then I sent Mom on her merry way, and her daughter and I could get down to business. Not once did I tell the girl she needed to stop burning herself, nor did I say it was bad. I really didn't think it was bad. That was the key. I didn't express judgments, nor did I even have them in my thoughts. Again, all I saw was beauty. I realized she just wasn't satisfied or happy, so we focused all of our attention on bringing greater satisfaction and happiness into her daily life. Each time we met, she revealed more layers of her misery to me, and each time I sent her home with more feel-good homework to do. There were a few relapses that she filled me in on, but only after 2 months she went from a 0 to 1 happiness rating, her words, to an 8 and a 9. Her urge to burn herself was gone. By teaching her how to use the tools we've covered in this book, she learned she was able to turn her life around in a very short period of time. Deep breath. And what was interesting about this, I forgot to mention, I didn't have it in this, but she actually was in a mental hospital for a week or two. And again, every single day it just got worse and worse and worse because she kept feeling more isolated and separated. And again, I know this story is very simple and almost seems a little happy-go-lucky in my approach to it. But what's fascinating is the first few years of having my center in Arizona, I got case after case after case of really, really extreme individuals with depression, suicidal tendencies, self-harming, and addiction. And that was just kind of what we could say I was just thrown into helping people with on a very early level when I was just beginning to teach the Living Peace teachings. And I think the reason why so many people were flocking to my center and working with me that had really extreme issues that traditional therapy and counseling was not necessarily helping with is because most people on our planet and even in our culture, they might be very knowledgeable, but they're not necessarily living a non-dualistic perspective. And one of the number one things that helps people heal with major emotional struggles is someone holding space with a non-dualistic perspective. And what I mean by that is releasing the agenda of good, bad, right, wrong. Because think about it, if you have someone in your life that you love that's hurting themselves or possibly has suicidal thoughts, the first thing you're probably going to do is judge it from a place of love, right? Because you freak out. You're worried. You don't want them to harm themselves. You might even be triggered and you'll say, stop that. Why are you hurting yourself? I love you. Don't you love yourself? Like, how can you be doing this? We get so caught up in our attachment to it that we don't realize that in our loving, we're actually pushing these people away. Who's ever had that happen to you on any level? Someone loves you so much that they end up pushing you away because they're trying to force fit you into a mold to their own agenda, if you will. And so what this girl loved, and what a lot of teens that I've worked with over the years, is I don't bullshit them. A lot of adults bullshit kids, and they try to paint pictures that is not actual real reality. And I literally just said, look, there's peace and there's pain. That's your polarity. It's not duality. Duality would be there's a right way and a good way, and there's a bad way and a wrong way. I don't go down that rabbit hole. Instead, I just simply say, there's peace and there's pain. Right now, you're obviously in pain. Which direction do you want to go further in? Obviously, she wants to go towards peace. Anyone naturally wants to go towards peace. But when it feels like the direction towards healing comes with a lot of judgment and that they're wrong and bad if they mess up, they're afraid to even try, because it's when you're at rock bottom and you look up, it's very daunting and it's very scary to try and climb. And you notice that there's going to be all these expectations on you for getting better. And so each time you try, you feel like you're disappointing people every time that you make a slip up. And that's why I said, I'm not judging you for harming yourself. I'm not judging you for that. I really don't give a shit if you do that. Those words right there, those words saying, I don't give a shit about you, sounds so cruel, but it's also so refreshing to literally be off the hook of someone being attached to your own life path. Because often we're surrounded by people who give too many shits about us, and it feels like so much pressure. And so when you're able to have a conversation with someone that is unattached in a loving way, yet you could still see the compassion in their eyes, it is so, so, so healing. And that is after week and week of working together with each other. She was able to come into the session and unload all of her stuff and not feel a single ounce of any guilt, any shame. Even when she ended up burning herself again, it wasn't an, oh my gosh moment. I thought we're working on this, damn it. It wasn't that type of vibration. It was, okay, tell me more about that. Let's explore that. We're working on the peace, we're working on the pain. And the challenge is, in traditional counseling and therapy, I think over the past 10 years, they're getting a lot better at this. But when I was a teenager, I was clinically diagnosed with depression for 6 years of my life on antidepressants. And every time I went into that doctor's office, I could feel the judgment. You could feel the judgment, and then the taking of the notes and all this. It just was so impersonal. There wasn't a connection there at all. And there was multiple ones that I was taken to. And there was always this idea that there was something wrong with me. There was something wrong with me. And I was a case that needed to be fixed, rather than someone that needed to be seen and heard. And a lot of my depression was stemming from not being seen and not being heard. And that's why these teachings that we teach in Living Peace is literally giving us the tools in our daily lives to fully see, hear, acknowledge, and accept each other. Not only ourselves, but every single person that we interact with. Fully see, acknowledge, hear, and accept each other. And that right there is absolutely miraculous when we're able to touch that. Because we've talked about this on previous Sundays. Normally when you see other people, and therapists do this too, because again, they're getting the knowledge, but it doesn't mean they're actually living these teachings. When we see other people, we're seeing them through the lens of our own agenda. We're seeing them through the lens of our own bias. And what's challenging when we're educated in traditional education, sometimes we're seeing people through the lens of the diagnosis. And that can also be limiting as well. And so when we're learning from Eastern philosophy such as Zen Buddhism and Taoist thought, it teaches us to bring together traditional psychology, traditional science, but also bring in this understanding of the ego and understanding that there is so much more perception that we can access when we have inner peace ourselves. Because if we don't have inner peace, how the fuck are we going to lead anyone else to inner peace, right? If a parent doesn't have inner peace, how are they going to teach inner peace to their child? If a parent doesn't have happiness, how are they going to teach happiness to their child? If a friend, if we're holding space for a friend, if we're holding space for literally anything. And that's why, you know, as a pastor and as a Zen teacher, as a life coach, my number one purpose every single freaking day is to return to my peace. Because I recognize that if I'm caught up in my own mind, I can't hold space for someone else. So I'm never off the clock. I'm always working on that, working on that, working on that, working on that. And what's funny is I go back to my own teenage years, and my mom actually gave me that little nugget. She literally would tell me every single morning when I would walk out that door, she'd say, remember, the most important thing today is that you're happy. Nothing else matters. The most important thing today is that you're happy. And there's almost like this intuitiveness that she knew that with happiness would come good grades. With happiness would come social interaction. With happiness, all of the other things that we normally make our focus point would fall into place. But without that stability of happiness, then the grades would suffer. Without that stability of happiness, then the social interactions would suffer. And so a lot of times we're focusing on the goals of teaching, you know, for our lives to work towards, but we're missing the actual daily vibration that we need to be in for us to actually achieve those goals. Because when you have a foundation of emotional stability, emotional calm, emotional happiness, emotional peace, what's fascinating is that you can handle the heavy blows that life deals you. But when you put that practice on the back burner and you're just only working on that singular goal that you want to really get to, and you say, once I have this, then I could be happy, and then I can feel emotionally stable, then I could feel loved, then I can ... You could literally fill that in with any goal. It's going to be so much harder to get to point B from point A because you're not coming at it from a place of stability. Does that make sense? So breathe that in for a moment. So let's talk about polarity and duality for a moment. So in my book, I differentiate between the two. Polarity is a natural dichotomy found in the entire universe. So you have daytime, nighttime, you have life and death, or rather, you have death and birth. You have hot and cold, east and west, everything else in between. There's just natural dichotomy. Even our atoms have a masculine and feminine element to them, a principle. And so what's fascinating is everything has this polarity. That's what allows the universe to function. Duality is when we start to add morality. So think of that. Just always remember that. Duality is when you add morality. Duality, morality, duality, morality. And so you start to see the dichotomy of life, and then you create moral judgments on what is better than the other. And so we like to think that birth is better than death, right? That's a pretty straightforward one. A lot of people they resonate with daytime, while nighttime is scary. And so they like to think that happy emotions are wonderful, they're great, but negative emotions are these terrible things that we need to push away. And so anything that we kind of get into this idea of like and dislike, good, bad, right, wrong, we start to create separation. And in that separation, suffering starts to really take root. Pain is natural. We're going to feel pain for the rest of our lives. You can't help but feel pain with certain things because we're temporary. Everything that we're ever doing is a temporary manifestation. This moment that we're in together is the only time this moment will ever exist. So fucking enjoy it, people. Be present. But any moment, every moment is always just that moment that exists. And how humbling is that? Hot damn. But what's fascinating is that we really start to develop opinions about things. And in those opinions, we develop ideologies and belief systems. And then we could throw spirituality into it. Then all of a sudden you create this idea of sin, you create this idea of hell, and you then start to use behaviors as a moral framework for what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong. But then what happens is you start to judge other people on this measuring stick of morality. And anyone that doesn't measure up to whatever belief system that you're attached to, you're going to freaking judge, and you're going to separate from. And you're going to say, this is a terrible, bad thing. You shouldn't be doing that. Stop it. And then who's ever heard that sentence before? It makes you feel separate, doesn't make you feel unified. And so a lot of religions ground themselves with dualistic perspectives, and that's what turns a lot of people off. Now, all those same religions that have duality in their teachings also has non-duality in their teachings, and there's a lot of beautifulness. But because we're humans and we all have egos, the ego loves to attach more to the duality aspect because it likes feeling self-righteous. It likes to feel like it's being the one that's saved and in God's grace rather than not, and then seeing other individuals who are not, and then we might fall into pity, which is also duality. We're pitying people and we say, oh my goodness, if only you just did this, then you'd feel better. And so we're trying to help people from a place of pity rather than helping people from what their requests are, if that makes sense. Have you ever tried helping anyone based off of your own belief system of what you thought was wrong about the individual, and you completely ignored what their actual request was? If you've ever been in a relationship, that happens all the time. I get this a lot in couples coaching, where one partner will be expressing themselves and then the other partner before doesn't even let the first partner finish and then instantly goes into fix-it mode. And in that fix-it mode, they're trying to fix a situation from their own belief system and mindset of what they think the situation is, rather than fully listening to their partner and understanding that maybe that person didn't want them to fix it at all. They just wanted to be heard. That's a very common thing that occurs. And so I'm going to go ahead and read. You can follow along in your little pamphlet here. We'll go ahead and read the first two paragraphs. So excerpt from Living Peace, pages 119 to 120. Polarity, and this will be a little bit of a recap. Polarity is the inherent dichotomy found throughout the universe. It exists in all things, down to the very atoms with their positive and negative particles. This polarity exists naturally in our world as daytime and nighttime, hot and cold, and even birth and death. Anytime two seemingly opposing forces are found, there's likely polarity involved, in which one cannot exist without the other. This creates a healthy balance so life may flourish. Taoists may recognize this beautiful harmonizing dance via the yin and yang symbol, in which each contrast organically flows into the other, forever waxing and waning. In natural polarity, there is no judgment involved. Nothing is bad or wrong, it just exists. The moment we begin to add judgment, opinion, and morality to life, we create duality. In order to make sense of the world, we develop opinions about what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong. We may even develop our own opposing concepts, such as what is holy or sinful, or the dualism of heaven and hell. Because these opinions are based on human perception and assumption, this human-made duality causes our planet more harm than benefit. But then people always ask me, they're just like, well, what about war, Alaric? What about murder? What about these things that are really fucking stuff up? Excuse my language. What about these things? And I say, that's violence. Violence is painful. That's a fact. But I'm not going to go into that it's wrong or bad, because the moment that I say it's wrong or bad, I stop making it about the violence and I start making it about my own agenda on what I think is right or wrong, good or bad. And so I make it more about my perception than the actual violence at hand. And here's a perfect example. Turn on the news and you see a tragedy happening and then you just start crying. You can't help it. You just feel so caught up in the pain that you're seeing something that happened. You're making it about you. You're being self-centered because you're having an emotional response about something external that's actually happening in the world that you're judging as so terrible. And you're crying and you're having all these things you just can't even imagine. You're getting lost in your head. It's neurotic. And the reason why you're going down that emotional rabbit hole is because you're assigning a meaning to it. You're assigning tragedy. It's bad. It's wrong. All these awful things are happening. There's such a terrible story that goes on. But when we get caught up in that, guess what happens? You can't hold space for it, because it's now more about you and your emotional processing of the terrible situation versus being able to hold space for it and say, hot damn, there is so much violence there. There is so much conflict. There is so much pain. There is so much death. See, I'm speaking factually about it. What can we do to help alleviate the pain in this situation? What can we do as a society to come together and make sense of this? How can I reach out to these individuals being impacted by this? And how maybe let me ask them what their needs are rather than me getting caught up in my own emotional processing of it. And you see, now I'm going to loop back around. That's how I helped that girl at the very beginning of this story. I did not create a story around her pain of morality. Instead, I just factually looked at the pain and was able to communicate with her from a place of non-emotional processing, because when we are so caught up in our own neurosis of the rights and wrongs, good and bads of the world, the things that make us sad, the things that cause us grief, the things we develop our own opinions and biases, and it completely blocks the information and the action that we can take to actually heal things. Does that make sense? And this is why when people work with me, they heal their shit quickly. You know, a lot of people that have worked with me have been to counseling years and years and years before, or they've been in it for years, and it just doesn't always hit home because, again, the counselor and themselves are not functioning from a place of non-dualistic perspective. They're functioning from a place of moralist perspective, and then they just right away fall down that rabbit hole. The guilt never goes fully away. The shame never fully goes away. The grief never fully goes away. And sure, we may be able to function a little bit better, but there's still that guilt. There's still that shame. There's still that grief. There's still that anger. There's still those triggers. Who has triggers that just, someone pushes it, boom, you go. But when you understand the nature of ego and you understand the true nature of reality, you can release these things. And that's why this shit works. You return to inner peace. And that is a beautiful thing. And again, I'm not making this shit up, people. And it's what's fascinating. I was really getting into some reading the Tao Te Ching recently. And I wrote this book before I even read the Tao Te Ching. And that's what's funny about duality and polarity, is that it's almost like it was just naturally always in my mind. And then finally I just put it to paper. But then once I actually started reading more of these ancient texts, I'm like, holy shit. They're saying it very well, even better than me. I had no idea that this was already out there. And so I actually included at the end of this paper some quotes from Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching, that perfectly summarizes this understanding of polarity. When people see something as beautiful, other things become ugly. When people see some things as good, other things become bad. So instantly, when you focus on one and you add a like or dislike to it, you create the opposite of it. Rushing into action, you fail. Trying to grasp things, you lose them. Forcing a project to completion, you ruin what was almost ripe. And so what's fascinating about the Tao Te Ching is it's full of examples like this where there's this natural polarity that anytime the scales tip, you lose balance, whichever direction you're going to go in. And we kind of already shared an example of that, in where the tighter you try to hold on to a loved one, the further they go away. And what's fascinating is that they could be in the home and you lock them down. They're in your home and they're with you 24/7 because you're incredibly jealous and you have issues, or you're so afraid for their safety and protection. You're a helicopter parent, could be anything, any type of example. You lock them down in your life and you grasp them, you hold them. And they may be physically next to you always, but they are so emotionally far and mentally away from you. And so that's a perfect example. The more you hold, the further they go, but the more you release, the closer they are. Fascinating. And that's how you know people can live in another state. You could feel so emotionally close to them. Fascinating, isn't it? And then this last one I absolutely love. Fill your bowl to the brim and it will spill. Keep sharpening your knife and it will blunt. Chase after money and security and your heart will never unclench. Care about people's approval and you will be their prisoner. Do your work, then step back. The only path to serenity. Do your work and step back. The only path to serenity. And that's what's fascinating. And I think part of it comes from this idea of capitalism and just this natural idea that we've agreed to as a culture here in the West, that more is better. More is always better. More is always better. And what's fascinating is I've been watching this beautiful movement really take root in businesses called minimalism. Some of you may have heard of it, or essentialism. And what's interesting is that there have been a lot of people in my generation that reached success very quickly, multimillionaires, but then they burnt out almost immediately. They started a successful business, and then they got opportunity after opportunity, and opportunities kept coming. They kept taking them, and so they worked longer days, more hours to try and reach their first million, and they just kept going and going and going until their body completely collapsed. And then there's so many stories of examples out there where people literally in their 20s made their physical bodies so sick that they couldn't even move because of extreme exhaustion. Because they were, and then in hindsight, they're just like, I should have stopped. It would have been beneficial for me to stop when I actually had a nice amount of success, and now I don't have anything because I couldn't maintain the thing that I was building. And so that happens consistently with individuals, that we have something that we like and we want more of it. And we're actually taught in this culture that that is a good, positive thing. And maybe we're not directly taught that, but on a subconscious level, in a lot of ways, there's that idea there that if you have something good, try to hold on to it, try to cultivate more of it, try to soak more of it up, and there's never a stopping point. There is never a stopping point. And so then I work with people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and they're still fucking going. And it's very difficult to get to a nice, comfortable point where we could say, this is enough. I'm comfortable with where I'm at. This is enough. I'm comfortable with where I'm at. And so the Taoist perspective, of course, would be a balance between that. They'd say, be able to exist in that enoughness, but it doesn't mean that we stop doing. And so that's the healthy balance. To be able to be in full appreciation of this life that we have created, but at the same time, still recognizing that you are still a being of creation. You're never going to stop creating things, but you're no longer chasing after something that you think is going to complete you. Because if you're caught up in that mentality of completionism, then you're always going to be chasing until the day of your passing into non-physical form. Because it never actually comes. It is one of the biggest jokes there is for this human nature. And the irony in certain Buddhist sects and even Taoism is that enlightenment comes when you fully let go of that grasping nature. And we know this even from the three aspects of ego that we teach in Living Peace, where there is the push, the pull, the hold tight, the three aspects of ego, the push, the pull, the hold tight. We're pushing against the things that we don't like, ego. We're grasping for the things that we do like, ego. We're holding tight to the things that we fear losing, ego. So anytime we're in that realm of three things, we're getting caught up into suffering. There's naturally going to be pain in life, but when we are so attached and clinging to pushing it away, resisting it, chasing after things that bring us relief, or holding tight onto the things that we already have, it just creates a very difficult platform for us to build our lives upon. And so let's take a breath. I could spend 3 hours on this, so I have to keep it moving. So let me give you a practice. This is what we're going to be doing moving forward. In my book, I have a practice for each of the 9 tenets. So there's 9 practices, 9 tenets. This one is called the eraser, and it is erasing dualistic vocabulary from your life. And so I'll just naturally give you examples that you can start erasing. So to the best of your ability, again, if you judge yourself every time you say it, you're defeating the purpose. So I invite you not to judge yourself if you kind of goof up. It's just to be mindful with. Release the word wrong and bad, and release the word should and need. Because when you release the word bad and you release the word wrong and trying to define and explain things, it's going to force your mind to think differently. And it's going to force your mind to come up with new ways and softer ways to explain things. And for parents, you may know this to be true in a sense, or even teachers, anyone who's worked with kids, or even dogs, actually, because it's so easy. It's so easy because when you say, stop that, that's bad, right? It's so much easier. Again, it doesn't work for animals, but for kids, we say, don't do that. That's bad, because it's so much easier than taking a whole damn 3 sentences or paragraph to explain why it's not healthy to do that thing. I was going to say why you should not be doing that. You see the should, instantly, boom, back to judgment. But don't do that. That's wrong. You shouldn't be doing that. That's bad. Right there. Boom, judgment. Versus, sweetie, if you're touching that, that is actually going to lead to a lot of pain for yourself. You know, if you touch that pain, touch pain, break it down into things that are easier to understand. And so when we take the time to explain things, no matter the age, it actually helps further progress children's critical thinking skills. When we just keep it super simple and we just say that's bad, that's wrong, it doesn't actually formulate strong ideas of things. I know this very well as a gay man when I was growing up in school systems, because kids would come up to me and they would just say, you know, my parents said that homosexuality is a sin and that you're a bad person. I'm like, well, let's dive into that. You know, they would just instantly jump to that's bad, that's wrong. And the only excuse that they ever had been told is that, well, that's just what I said, or the Bible said it so. But they don't even unpack the actual verses in the Bible that actually don't really talk about that at all. And so it's fascinating is that we just throw out things. We throw out opinions like they're Skittles. Just, take them. Literally, we throw out our opinions like they're Skittles, and we don't actually take the time to dissect them. And so if you take the time to dissect them, you are going to challenge yourself like there's no tomorrow. And it's going to be a really healthy way that's going to start to recondition your mind. And here's why we do it. Language sculpts culture. Think about that. Language sculpts culture, and language and language and culture sculpt reality. And so the way in which you're explaining things, the way in which the vocabulary that you use, the sentence structure that you use, it completely starts to change your reality over time and how you're relating to the world around you. And what's fascinating is obviously I've seen that to be true in our lives, but since I've been doing this for 10 years and I've had consistent students during that time, I've watched how their language has changed over the years. And I've watched how their reality has changed in connection to their language changing. Because when your language changes, you can't help but have it influence your perception. And when your perception changes, it influences your behavior. And when your behavior changes, it influences your reality. And all of a sudden, boom, inner peace. Maybe not that quickly. But this is such an important beginning step for us that we can use on a daily basis to just simply soften the language that we're using. Softening the language that we're using. And then you can even bring it into the second teaching, which is mastery of impulse. Not reacting right away when anything triggers you. You know, if you're a yeller or if you're a spouter or if you spit words the moment that you get triggered by something, we practice PPR, pause, process, and respond. And so you bring it back. You process the situation, then you respond to it rather than react to it, because how you're reacting to life creates the same situation again and again and again. If you're a reactive person, chances are you see patterns. It's like the same shit just keeps happening. And what's fascinating in this field of work, I've been privileged to see people's lives who are just in pure chaos all the time. And I see people's lives who are not in chaos all the time. And the funny thing is, the reactionism always leads to further chaos. The words that are being used continues to reinforce the reality. And so when you just sit your ass back, take a step back, you do your work, do it well, then take a step back, you stop trying to force things, stop trying to fix things, take a step back, unplug yourself from the chaos, things have a way of working themselves out with or without your intervention. One of my favorite Zen quotes, every spring, the grass returns and grows by itself. Every spring, the grass returns and grows by itself, with or without your intervention. Without you. Think about that. Life itself continues to move forward, with or without you. Isn't it wonderful to know how insignificant you each are? I had to really accept that because I had a concept in myself that I was special for a while. Because my generation is known as the special generation. All of our fucking parents, you're special. No matter what we do, we're special. And, you know, in this field of work, you could even get into that egotistical belief that, oh, I am special. I have these special teachings. They're like magic. They change reality. But what's fascinating is what actually leads to inner peace is recognizing that even if I disappeared tomorrow, life would still go on and it's okay. And so really, I'll conclude with this, I'll bring it all home, is we really want to work on escaping the self-centered mentality, because it is our self-centeredness that, my gosh, gets us into a lot of trouble and leads to a lot of pain. And in the song that we were listening to, you know, the lyric of, you know, it's like the world revolves around me and I can't help but have these thoughts that keep bringing me down. Well, those thoughts that keep bringing you down is that you have these negative thoughts that are based off self. Negative thoughts are based off self. Negative thoughts are based off self because you keep recreating them, recreating them, recreating them, recreating them, recreating them, recreating them. And so when you actually unplug from the self and you release the self-centeredness, because a lot of people think self-centeredness is just narcissism. No, self-pity is also equally self-centeredness because you're centered on the self. When you're beating yourself up day in and day out with negative thoughts, you're just as self-centered as someone who's taken a million selfies every single day. You know, because, example, but the constant looking at the self, 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 thinking of the self, thinking of the self. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. I don't like myself. I don't like myself. I don't like myself. So again, a lot of people only think narcissism and arrogance are self-centered, but I want to try and help you understand that it's also the negative thoughts that really make us that way. And again, this isn't to make you feel shitty. You know, it's not to make you feel worse. It's just recognizing that it's still the ego. And maybe you haven't been able to fully release those negative thoughts about yourself because you haven't understood the root of it, where it's actually coming from. It's coming from the neurosis of self-centeredness. And so we learn to take a step back from it. Let's take a breath. And so to wrap everything up, I'm going to be actually teaching, and I'll go more into this a little bit, but I'm actually be teaching my first Dunasha workshop here in Colorado on the 22nd of this month, which is June 22nd. It's going to be a 6-hour workshop. It's going to be quite delicious and wonderful. And so the one thing missing from today's conversation is a nice back and forth. And unfortunately, we really can't do that on a Sunday. That's not really the time and place for it. But I want to be able to go more into practices, daily practices that we can do to return us to our peace, to help us release our self-centered ideologies, to help us relinquish this idea of attachment to the 3 aspects of ego and the attachment to self. And a great example of this is, who's heard of like self-empowerment and self-love? Did you know that that can hurt you? Because we're trying to love ourselves and we're trying to empower ourselves, but you're still attaching to self. And so if you notice people who are always working on self-love and self-empowerment, it almost is like they're always in the same cycle. There's still that constant struggle, constant struggle, constant struggle, constant struggle. But the people who have inner peace don't even talk about self-love or self-empowerment. Because when you look in the mirror and you have inner peace, you just see neutrality. You don't need to belittle yourself and you don't need to empower yourself, because you simply do your work and you do it well, and that's it. That's the end of it. There's an underlying peace and neutrality of it. And so isn't that fascinating that we're going to learn and work together to teach you guys how to break that cycle of the same-sided coin of self-centeredness, of the self-love and self-empowerment, but also the self-pity and the self-judgment and the arrogance and the pain. And both sides of those cause us pain and make us lose ourselves in the neurosis of the rabbit hole mind. Make sense? So I just want to put that out there for anyone who might be listening at home. If you want to make a trip to Durango or Bayfield, it's going to be quite a delicious time. And we actually have a few people from Arizona joining us for that weekend. So it's quite delicious. So let's take a deep breath in. Coming back to point. And just recognizing that language sculpts reality. And so please, for those of you watching at home or those of us joining us today, please make that your practice on removing bad and wrong from your vocabulary, replacing with other things, and focus on finding new ways of explaining should and need. And if you need help with that, I can always definitely assist. Thank you all so much. And for those of you listening at home, there are links down below if you want to work together or offer any donations. We are a community that functions off of donations, so we appreciate any that you're able to give. Thank you, and see you.